No, it's got a full battery though, so.
Yeah, but that video was kind of like, oh, that's true.
Good evening, everyone. Mr. Steele, Ms. Hudson, and
Good evening. I'm going to step away for just a second.
There's Bill.
Sorry, I'm late.
Good evening, Mr. Chair.
I thought I might adjust the light to make it a little bit better, but maybe not.
You look good.
Is this being recorded? Oh, sorry. And can we stop it there and start again so I can have that little?
So let's see, we have. I guess we're waiting for James.
It says he's in the attendees list.
Can he be promoted?
Sorry, who needs to be promoted to panelist?
James Watson.
There he is.
Okay. And Deidre is here. Welcome. Okay, I guess we can begin. I'd just like to make a short introduction, and then I'll turn it over to Adrian, Adrian Steele, who is actually going to be presiding tonight. Good evening and welcome to this special meeting of the Charlottesville Civilian Review Board. Tonight we're going to engage in a mock hearing, a dry run of the procedures that we will use for future hearings that may be held when citizens request us to review investigations conducted by the Charlottesville Police Department. The subject of this model review is a case drawn from the internal affairs files of the Charlottesville Police Department. The board thanks Chief LaTroy Durrett, Lieutenant Michael Gore, City Attorney Lisa Robertson, and our Executive Director Hansel Aguilar for working out the logistics of getting the board access to the file. Something that which to my knowledge has never before occurred in Charlottesville. As I said, consistent with the board's interim hearing procedures, we have recruited a hearing examiner to preside over and facilitate the flow of the hearing. Mr. Adrian Steele, an attorney with many years' experience in police oversight, generously volunteered to perform this role. Before turning the meeting over to Mr. Steele, I reiterate that the hearing is a learning experience for the board. As in any rehearsal, it is unlikely that things will go perfectly, and I'm sure some of us will make mistakes. Throughout the development of our ordinance and procedures, concerns have been expressed regarding the ability of a volunteer board like ours to conduct a hearing like this. Hopefully tonight we will set a precedent that we can build upon and move forward. Finally, although the board members will be asked to express opinions regarding the case and its investigation, attendees should remember that no actual board decisions will be made during this mock proceeding. Public comments will be taken after the hearing and by email. Do the board members have any questions or comments before we start? All right, Mr. Steele, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Adrian Steele, and I have volunteered to be the hearing examiner for tonight's mock civilian review board hearing. In this proceeding, the board is going to consider a hypothetical review request based on an historic case from the Charlottesville Police Department records. In the scenario we are considering, an individual has filed a complaint against an officer of the CPD, claiming that the officer was disrespectful during a call for service. The complaint was received and investigated by the CPD. The allegation that the subject officer had violated section 400.00 of the Code of Conduct, courtesy, was judged to be unfounded, meaning that the CPD found no factual basis for the allegation. In the scenario we are evaluating, it is assumed that the complainant then requested that the CPD investigation be reviewed by the Charlotte Police Civilian Review Board. The members of the board have seen the complaint form as it was filed and have been given access to the CPD Internal Affairs file describing the investigation of the complaint. They have also viewed a video of an interview conducted by the complainant, with the complainant by a representative of the Charlottesville Police Department. As the CRB chair noted, the names of the parties, and real dates will not be mentioned. During this proceeding, we will hear statements from a representative of the police department and an individual playing the role of the complainant. In a quote, real hearing, we might also hear from statements from witnesses and or the subject officer. As examiner, I may ask clarifying questions of the parties after they make their statements. The parties may submit questions to me in writing by Zoom chat, and I will, as appropriate, pose those questions. I will also recognize members of the board who wish to ask questions to the parties. I may also call on Cynthia Hudson, the board's independent counsel, for advice on legal issues that may arise, and Alfonso Aguilar, the board's executive director, to help us work through the procedures. Just as an aside, I think we will do questions after each statement. So after the police department representative goes, and then the complainant goes, we'll ask after each of those. After the parties have made statements and responded to questions, the board will deliberate and discuss impressions and concerns related to the investigation. Each member will be asked to comment on various dimensions of the investigation: thoroughness, completeness, objectivity, impartiality, and accuracy. After the board deliberates, I will poll the members as to their preferred resolution of the review. The board will apply a preponderance of the evidence standard. In short, the board may, 1, agree with the findings of the investigation, 2, find that the result of the investigation is not consistent with the facts available to the department, or 3, find that the investigation was incomplete or defective, stating the reasons. In a real hearing, at that point, the chair of the board would ask for volunteers to draft a summary report of the board's findings for the city manager encourage individual board members to draft individual opinions as they see fit. That step will be omitted this evening. The board could also consider recommendations for changes in CPD policies, practices, and/or training based on their review of the investigation, but that step will not be included this evening as well. Okay, so any procedural questions from anyone? Hearing none and nothing in the chat, I will proceed. This hearing is called to order. We will begin with a statement from a representative of the Charlottesville Police Department. The floor is yours.
So good evening, everyone. I'm Lieutenant Mike Gore, Commander of Internal Affairs. I'll be acting in the role of the Chief of the Charlottesville Police Department tonight. We are here tonight to review a case that was brought against one of our police officers, where it was alleged that the officer was disrespectful during a call for service after the citizen was cordial and non-disrespectful to the officer. I'm now going to turn it over to Sergeant Wade so he can go through the procedures that Internal Affairs will take once the complaints come in.
So good evening. We wanted to provide a brief overview of the department's complaint investigation procedures through intake of the complaint, investigation of the complaint, and review of the complaint. Complaints filed with the Charlottesville Police Department come to the Office of Internal Affairs where they're numbered. After they're given a number, the complainant is provided with a receipt letter that documents the department's receiving the complaint and provides them with a roadmap of the complaint investigation moving forward. After that's done, an officer notification letter is also given to the subject officer or the officer who is the subject of the complaint. The officer also receives a copy of the complaint filed. Copies of the complaint also go to the Office of Chief of Police as well as the subject officer's division commander. If the complainant chooses to include the Police Civilian Review Board, a copy of the complaint would also be forwarded to them as well for their records. Once these steps have been taken, the complaint is able to be assigned for investigation. Once the complaint has been assigned, the investigation can begin. As we undertake the investigation of the complaint, we're going to identify any and all witnesses and evidence relative or relevant to the complaint. We're going to then conduct interviews with the complainant, with any witnesses that the police or that the complainant themselves identify, along with interviews of the subject officer and any other officers who are party to the complaint. Once that's done, we'll review all evidence collected to include body-worn camera footage, in-car footage, any third-party evidence received during our investigation. After all witnesses and officers have been interviewed and all evidence has been reviewed, we'll compile a final report. The final report is going to contain all of the evidence gathered in the investigation. It will analyze the evidence collected to determine how it fits with the allegations made in the complaint. Once the final report and all the evidence has been compiled and analyzed, a findings page will be submitted. That findings page contains the suggested outcome of the case as determined by the investigating supervisor. That investigative file, which will include everything that I just spoke about, then moves into the review process. In the review process, the file will be reviewed by the chain of command, beginning with the subject officer's division commander. That division commander will then review the file and forward it to the office of the assistant chief of police, who would then review and submit the file to the office of the chief of police for final review and closure. After the review process is completed, the file is returned to the internal affairs unit. Closure letter is drafted after the findings are reviewed. That closure letter is then sent to the complainant The closure letter contains a synopsis of the investigation, the department's findings, and how those findings were reached. If the complainant elected to include the PCRB in the complaint process, a copy of that closure letter is also sent to the PCRB. Additionally, a closure memorandum is sent to the subject officer detailing the outcome of the case, so they're aware as well. After that, the process with internal affairs is completed, and the case is cataloged and stored.
In reference to this particular case, the procedures were followed as the policy states. I would just reiterate that at the beginning, after receiving the complaint, a case file is put together as a roadmap and it is handed over. If it does not stand with the Office of Internal Affairs, it will go to the commanding officer of the unit, which the subject officer is assigned to at that time. Once the Office of Internal Affairs receives the case file back with the signatures of the chain of command, they would then send out a closure letter to the complainant. And also, if they have selected for the PCRB to receive a copy of the complaint, the PCRB will also receive the closure letter. The subject officer at that time will receive a memo of the closure along with a copy of the letter that was sent to the complainant. And then at that time, the case file is filed away. And that's where we ended at.
Thank you. Is that the end of your presentation, just to make sure I'm clear?
Yes.
Okay. Let me ask a couple of clarifications before I ask if there are any questions from the board members. I have none in the chat from a party or other source. Could you provide and read to the assemblage the conclusion that was reached so that others who may not have had access to the file can understand? And you can take that from the letter that went to the complainant, because that's a public, to stay away from non-confident or other parts of the file. So if you could just read what that was so everybody's on the same page, please.
All right, the closure letter reads, this letter is to follow up on the complaint, to inform you the investigation of the complaint has been completed. Possible violations investigated first to follow. In this state's General Order 400.00 Code of Conduct Courtesy. Internal investigations can result in following findings. Sustained, which is defined as allegations true and officers determined to have acted in violation of applicable procedures, techniques, and regulations. Not resolved, unable to verify the truth or falsity of claims and allegations. Exonerated, defined as allegations true, but not misconduct due to the adherence of applicable procedures, techniques, and regulations. Unfounded, defined as no basis or fact to support the allegation. The disposition of the investigation is as follows: unfounded. The evidence and statements collecting during this investigation do not support the statements made in the initial complaint. Per our policy, you are afforded, and we're speaking of the complainant, are afforded the opportunity to further meet and discuss the investigation if you choose. If you wish to meet or have any additional questions or concerns, please contact me, and then the signature and contact information of the investigating officer or internal affairs is listed at the end of the page.
Thank you. I just thought it might be good for everybody to be working off the same page, literally as it were. And I have no further clarification type questions. So now I will ask if the board members have any questions they would like to ask. And if you can, I think it'd be easiest for you to use the raising your hand, which on your screen is in the lower sort of right under reaction. If you hit that reaction link, it'll show up things you can do. And one of those is raise your hand. Mr. Mendez.
I just want to make sure here, perhaps get a little advice from our counsel, Cynthia. I'm going to do something that no one, to my knowledge, has done before, which is ask the Charlottesville Police Department about specific aspects of their investigation. I'm assuming that I'm allowed to do that.
Yes, in the context in which this scenario is before the board, which is a review request, and as the hearing examiner has indicated, your review is limited to determining whether or not that the investigative process was thorough, excuse me, complete, impartial, objective, and accurate. The focus here is on the police department's methodology applied in the investigative process. And so questions about that would be appropriate.
And then remember to be careful not to use any names, which you may have seen in the file, and or any dates. Thank you. Mr. Mendez.
Yeah, I'm going to try not to monopolize, but I do have a number of questions. The first is that in the file, it is stated that I believe it was the sergeant who took down the complaint, had body-worn camera footage of taking that down the complaint, and that might have provided more information about what is otherwise maybe not clear in the file itself. Was that body-worn camera footage ever located?
No, sir.
Okay.
Did you say no?
No.
Thank you.
All right. Next.
It was not, the body-worn camera footage for the supervisor that took the complaint was not identified due to the fact the investigator could not identify who the signature of that sergeant was at the time.
Thank you.
So there was nothing that was found.
I noticed that the complainant called the police at least 5 times during approximately 6 months prior to filing the complaint. A number of officers responded. Were any of these officers interviewed?
So according to the file, it looks as if the body-worn camera footage from the officers was reviewed to see if any of it was fit what the allegations from the complainant made, and it did not.
Okay, so was that from all of the different calls?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Well, that was not clear in the file, and that is a very useful piece of information. One of the things that you use pieces of evidence to use to suggest that the subject officer was not responsible was that he was not on duty at the time time of day during the encounter supposedly occurred. Were the is there any documentation of when the calls occurred? Again, I don't find this in the file, and it would have been nice also to find documentation of the subject officer's duty schedule, which would made things a lot clearer.
Okay, so in this file, the duty schedule was not added to this file, so it is not. Let me make sure. It is not added to it, so therefore he wouldn't have had that information. The calls for service he had checked into Learns, which is one of our computer systems, and also with the ECC to get a list of calls for service involving the complainant. And that's where he got the dates and the case numbers assigned, along with the officers identified as responding to the call.
Okay. Now the complainant gave a very sketchy or very brief physical description of the person who was allegedly rude to him. Now, is there any effort made to identify officers on those calls who fit that description?
Yes,
And there weren't?
it was. The supervisor that investigated this complaint is aware of the officers that responded. None of the officers that responded to the calls for service, the 5 that were mentioned in the case, fit the description given by the complainant.
Just one more thing. Did anyone contact the complainant's family for information? In other words, perhaps they saw an incident of discourtesy?
It is not listed in the file that that was done. So I would have to answer no.
Okay. Thank you. That's all I have.
Mr. Watson?
Got one or two questions. One of the things I'm wondering is, what is the policy with body worn cameras? Do the officers have to turn them on? Do they come on automatically? This sounds like it was kind of a based on, and we don't have a ton of information, but it sounds like that maybe the police were called out to the house and there was a conversation taking place. And so would an officer have to, turn their own camera on? Is that something that just happens when there's like a traffic stop? Or is it something that if you're walking down the downtown mall, it's always on? What is that trigger that what's the policy? If you respond to any type of call, 911, you show up, how does that work? As far as whether the cameras are on or not on.
Our policies is when every time we have an encounter with a person, a citizen, we're supposed to activate it. In a vehicle, if we're going to initiate a traffic stop that way, when the lights come on, the in-car camera comes on, which activates the body-worn camera. And they are supposed to turn it on when they exit out the vehicle. So the camera comes on in the car, and the one on their uniform, they have to turn on.
But it's up to a depending on the scenario. Like if it was a what would you call it, police non-emergency type, response to a call. You show up to somebody's house, they say there's something going on next door, but you show up and you don't have your lights on or anything. So the officer gets out, approaches the house. It's totally up to them to hit that button, right, to turn it on, or is it because the siren never went on, all those things? Okay.
By policy, they have to turn it on anytime they have an encounter with this citizen.
But they can
We
forget
also
to do
have
that.
to be mindful. We also have to be mindful that with technology, while it may work at one call, if they go to a next not excuse, they hit the button, it may not come on automatically or may shut off. So we have to look into all variables why the body worn camera footage is not available or if it stops during the call. Mr. Mendez, I will have to back up if you give me 1 second. Mr. Watson, you asked, was there any body worn cameras or anybody identified as talking to Mr. or to the complainant? It was an officer that was identified. Body worn camera footage was reviewed, and it did not fit anywhere in the allegation that was made against the CPD officer.
I don't know how to do the raise hand thing. I'm sorry.
Okay. Let me call on Mr. Brown. I'll just take a shot.
Sure. Thank you. So in the, I guess in the video, it appears that there is an established relationship with the investigating officer and the complainant appears to not be able to identify the particular officer that he's complaining about. Has there ever been a follow-up from him with regard to a further description or a further contact in this particular incident?
No, there was no further contact or follow-up made by the complainant in reference to the officer that he believes would have done that.
Okay, so so essentially, I guess the question would be, at this point, is there an officer or is there not an officer? Because that's kind of seems to be the basis for the entire complaint.
So the best answer I can give of that, sir, is the investigator conducted an investigation where he looked into all possibilities around the time of the allegation of the officers who would have had contact with the complainant to see if any of them fit the description or were involved in any of the type of behavior given by the complainant, and none were identified. So to answer your question, no, there was not an officer identified.
Very well, thank you.
Did all, Mr. Brown? Mr. Mendez again.
Yeah, I'd like to point out again that, this is as an aside, this is sort of an artificial setting in the sense that we know that in the real world, the complainant did not, follow up. For purposes of this hearing, he did. And very shortly, we'll hear why.
So I'm sorry, how was that? I mean, I'm not aware of how that happened. Where are we going with that?
I think you may be saying that the complainant's representative might describe what he did, what the complaint did. So you would not have heard that yet. I think that's where we are. Mr. Watson again.
Maybe to sort of help or make sure we're all on the same page. I guess for this hypothetical, this mock hearing, we're assuming that the complainant took another step and said, I'm going to go ahead and file an opportunity to have a hearing.
Yes.
I didn't say that the way I meant to say it. So is that what you're basically saying, is what we're in this virtual format, but that's what kind of triggered this. This would be assuming that he went ahead and said, well, I don't agree. I want the PCOB to look at it and have a hearing. I don't know if you guys hear me or not.
It's my understanding that's correct. They are assuming a request for review was submitted. Any other questions from the board? I have one clarification, but I wanted to see if any other board members had questions of the police department. Just to clarify what I thought Lieutenant Wade said was that investigator, I'm just trying to clarify this, the investigator examined the physical appearance of all of the officers on duty at the time this event is purported to have happened, and none of those matched the description the complainant gave. Is that what you said?
What I said was when he reviewed the calls for service and the officers that responded to the calls for service involving the complainant, those officers did not fit the description given by the complainant.
Okay, that's fine. I misheard it. I was trying to clarify whether or not it was that or the broader one that I just described. And I wasn't saying that it should or shouldn't happen. I just wasn't clear what you were saying. So that's all I have in clarification. And I see no questions from any other party. Mr. Watson, sorry. Thank you. Officer Wade. You're on mute, Mr. Watson.
Oh, sorry about that. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so we know there were 5 calls, and they did this background to see if any of the prior officers could have fit that description. Did they just say though earlier that there was a video of the wellness check? I'm assuming it was a wellness check in which the gentleman is saying, the complainant is saying that would have been the time when an officer was rude to him. Sounds like there were 5, but I thought maybe it was said earlier that there may have been a video, or was there no video at all? I know there was a video of the follow-up after the complaint was filed, but is there any video from? So I know there's a 5. Is there any other video that would? And when did this actually occur? Because I think we got the time of night it occurred, but I don't know if we had like what. I know the complaint came in like around June 1st or something like that, but it was a little bit fuzzy as to when this encounter occurred.
Just don't use the year, please.
Correct.
Sometimes you can lose track of these things and just actually try and, get the actual facts, but we're trying to keep it
Maybe
anonymous.
some time to look at that. I was trying to pull it all together when I was reading everything, and it was I thought it was a little confusing to know exactly when. I know when the complaint came in and when they began to look into it, and I know when they kind of interviewed the complainant down, so many days later, but
So when the complaint came in, he did not list a specific date that the incident happened. The investigator, with that limited information, researched back 6 months up into the complaint to see if anything would have fit the allegation or the call for service that the complainant was referring to. And as a matter of fact, the investigator looked back even further to see if the alleged officer had any contact through a call for service or anything that was noted, and nothing was found. Did that answer your question, Mr. Watson?
oh yes, sir. Thank you.
Mr. Frazier?
Frazier, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank
Sorry.
you. Lieutenant Gore, do you have a record of whether this individual was previously known to CPD and had there been prior encounters with your officers?
I do know that there has been prior incidents and contact with our officers, yes.
And do you know whether any of those resulted in a complaint to IA?
No.
No, there haven't, or you don't know?
I do not know prior to my me getting to internal affairs that there were any complaints filed by that citizen.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Ms. Carpenter?
Thank you for all the questions. I'm finding this very interesting, but I do have a question about time, Mr. Steele, since you are the hearing examiner. We have spent 26 minutes, almost a half an hour on these questions, and I want to make sure we're thorough and we get to where we need to go. But when will we be able to hear from the community member in reference to their complaint that, is now the subject of this hearing?
I had understood as soon as the board members are done with their questions, and while the times were set to be anticipated, it would seem that a fulsome discussion, which we may now have been completed, where we are. So let me just check one more time if there are any questions of the police department at this point. If not, we'll move on to the complainant, and his presentation will likewise be fulsome and won't be held to his. It's not a match for match. It's just we want to get a full and fair presentation by everyone. Okay, well then we'll close that for. Okay, well thank you for bringing it up. It's a good point. We will move on to the complainant. Excuse me. Yes. Okay, I thought I heard someone. We will move on to the complainant, and I don't know exactly how I don't know who that is actually. Are the complainant's representative? So, Hansel, if you could tell us how that's going to happen. Mr. Fitz.
Yes, could you ask me the question again, or?
how do we now move to the complainant?
Okay,
So he,
right.
his
Present.
his representative. Or
No,
we have to have the
he's speaking
complainant
on,
now?
yes, he's speaking on his behalf.
All right, we have the complainant. And who is that? So I can call on him.
I don't hear you, complainant. I don't know whether your volume is down or what.
Roy Fitch is, are you there, sir? I see your camera. I'm not sure if your audio is working. Can you hear us? Oh,
Don't hear
we
you.
can't hear you.
Any luck now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
All right, well, sir, you've heard, I'm Adrian Steele, and we're glad you were able to join us this evening. You've heard the presentations and the questions to the Charlottesville Police Department. So if you would please explain, identify yourself, and then tell us the reason you filed your complaint. You asked for your review, well, filed your complaint, and then asked for review. Please proceed.
Yes, so thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for allowing me a chance to share with you. I just wanted to share and reiterate that during the incident, I did feel disrespected at that time by that particular officer. I've also felt that way, with my past encounters with that officer. And I wanted to make sure that that was made aware. Right now, I'm uneasy as things, currently stand, because I do feel like I was kind of coaxed into just letting this go. So I wanted it to be known that, I don't necessarily want to drop this matter. I would like to pursue this complaint further.
Is that what your initial statement is? That's fine if it is. Just want to make sure before I ask you a question.
Yes.
All right, could you, for everyone's edification, please tell us the manner in which you think, excuse me, I don't mean that, the manner in which you were disrespected?
It was, excuse me.
In this incident in particular right now.
In this incident in particular, I just feel like the physicality at the time, some of the questioning, and also just some of the aggressiveness or language or instruction that was given to me at the time made me feel disrespected.
Okay, that's fine. I just want to get that base information out, and then I think we'll switch now to questions from the board members.
Okay.
Mr. Brownian.
Sorry, yes. Mr. Fitch, thank you for coming and sharing with us today. It does take, a lot of courage to, bring these bring these complaints with regard to policing. So I do thank you for that. One of the, I guess the primary questions for me in reviewing the video and the conversation that you had with the investigator was, I guess, an officer wasn't necessarily defined, or they weren't able to ascertain who that officer is. Have you been able to do that in the sense that you had the conversation with the investigator?
At this time, I have not. I do feel like, based on the way things went that night, it did rattle me some. But I do not feel like at this moment I can identify.
Very well, thank you.
Other questions from the board? Okay.
Mr. Steele, I have a question.
Yes, sir. Sorry, I couldn't see your hand. Go ahead.
It's okay. Mr. Fitch, have you had previous interactions, good or bad, with this officer?
Yes, so from my recollection, and as best as I remember my experiences, I have had incidents with this officer in the past.
Okay. And were you able to describe the officer in some detail to the investigator? I believe it was Sergeant Wade.
At the time, I did try my best.
Okay. And was he able to help you with that? Was he able to, based on your description, give you a name or put a name to the face?
Not to my knowledge. I think
Okay.
he did promise to look into it, but not to my knowledge.
Okay. All right. The only other thing I wanted to say was just to piggyback on what Mr. Brown said, which is to thank you for coming forward. I know this is not easy, and we really appreciate it, but the only way we can function as a board is if you have, if you do come forward. So gratitude to you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Steele.
Welcome. Other questions from the board?
Yes, this is Deirdre Gilmore.
Ms.
Hey,
Gilmore?
Mr. Fitch. How you doing, Mr. Fitch?
I'm fine. How are you?
I'm good. Did they, you gave the department a description of this officer?
Yes, at the time.
Did they do like a photo lineup? Did they show you pictures where you could pick from?
I did not have that opportunity.
And the reason I'm asking is because I noticed that with Mr. Reed, they didn't do that. And I'm pretty sure you, along with Mr. Reed, know the officer. So I think that's a problem. I think what needs to happen is you need to show photos, because just like with Mr. Reed.
Mr. Steele, we'll need to
Yes, ma'am.
refrain from using names. And I just want
Okay,
to interject.
That's fine. I don't know who Mr. Reed is. I was going to
Okay,
ask
I'm
what that
sorry. But
that
just like
reference
with
is
the
too.
other, okay, just like with the other young man, he was giving them a description. He said the face was narrow and his hair was dark. I think at that time that photos should have been shown. And I think the same thing needs to happen with Mr. Fitch. I think y'all need to take that into consideration. And the other thing, when people make a complaint, did you go into the station to do that, to the department?
Yes.
Okay. And the other thing that I would encourage people to do when they go to make a complaint, take someone with you, because 4 eyes are better than 2. 4 ears are better than 2. So sometimes other people can catch things that you don't. And maybe if you are talking, the other person can take notes. But I think y'all, when people make a complaint and they're not sure about who they're talking about, if they can give a description, I think you need to show photos.
Thank you. Can you, Ms. Gilmore, do we have more questions specifically about this? Mr. Fitch?
No.
Okay, thank you. I didn't mean to cut you off. I just want to make sure we had those in. Now I'm being cognizant of time, but I don't want to cut Mr. Fitch's time or any board questions off. Any other? I do have one follow-up question I'd like to ask, but I want to leave it to the board to ask their questions first. Okay, and we can come back after I ask my question. You mentioned Mr. Fitch, and this is just to clarify and try and get a full record so we don't come back and go, oh, we should have asked about that. You indicated, 1, you felt you were disrespected, and 2, you felt like you were coaxed into letting it go. Could you please provide the board with a description of what you think, what that's about?
Almost, I guess, coached into dropping the matter, almost as if it just may have been an off night for me, or maybe I took the actions in a different way or manner that I shouldn't have. And so when I got a chance to reflect, I felt like it was best to move forward. Disrespectful, just, when I stated that, it just made me feel like just the way I was handled in the incident, in the matter, as the matter was happening and unfolding. Just what took place during that time. So the actions, the language, the just the situation in itself during that moment.
Right. Thank you. Anything else from board members?
Mr. Watson's muted.
I don't see him on
Can you hear me?
because they don't always show up on the screen. Oh, I never mind. I can fix it. Just a minute. My screen switched to speaker, which it didn't. I didn't intend for it to do. Mr. Watson, sorry.
Going through the file, I didn't hear about any of this, but I'm wondering, was there any physical, did you feel in any physical danger? Did they put their hands on you? Did they cuff you? Did any of that type of thing? Were there any threats of that, putting you in jail, anything of that nature? Because I think this was more of a wellness check, that you had been feeling a little bit anxious. And so I know in these days and times, being anxious is pretty common. So if you could maybe elaborate on any of your physical safety or how you felt during this encounter or event.
Yeah, during the incident, I did encounter some physicality as far as not just being cuffed, but also the threat of being taken in. So that was the extent of it, as far as the threat of being taken in and the actual cuffs that were eventually removed once things unfolded and got squared away. And I was rattled in the moment. So I understand where Ms. Gilmore is coming from as far as having an opportunity to maybe see some photos or go about it a different way as far as trying to identify the officer.
Mr. Examiner, if I may.
Mr. Mendez? Yes.
If I may interject that the allegation of physical force is a new complaint, which in the extensive record that we have was not previously raised. So if I argue that for the time being, given the nature of the mock hearing, we should probably not pursue that. If this was a real hearing, we would probably adjourn and send this back to the police, with another complaint.
Okay, I noted that
it is perfectly possible to feel physically threatened without being handcuffed, and there's nothing in the record that says was. So.
And I know that, but I didn't know which way you all wanted to go. Thank you for clarifying that. So we will set that line off to the side. Mr. Watson, your hand.
I would just argue that I see where we're going and the limitations of time and reality and all that, but part of it could be the record is not complete. It could also be that the complainant was nervous while filling it out, or providing the information, or more brave enough to come forward and explain it, but not explain it fully due to more fear down the future. So we just had to keep that in mind too. But I do understand the parameters that we're working in with time and the fact that this is a mock trial.
Mr. Steele, might I just make an observation at this point, since we are in a learning mode with a mock scenario? Given that some information has come up that was not, as you indicated, a part of the file that you reviewed, the technique that you likely want to use to get to that is to use your questioning to ask whether or not that was a part of the complaint. Did you share that information either by way of an interview with the police during the course of their investigation, or was it a part of your written complaint? Or you might ask, why was it not a part of your written complaint, knowing that you have, with the understanding that you've seen the file and the complainant will have the information that you've seen the file. And in that regard, you cleave closer to your goal here, which is to determine whether or not the police investigation was complete, whether it was accurate. And to the extent the complainant then indicates that he's appealing because it wasn't accurate or wasn't complete in some fashion, you have a sense as to whether or not you can really judge the police with respect to perhaps information that the police did not have. But you have to establish that through this questioning, or either simply just based on your own review of the file, you can take that into account in deliberations. Well, this wasn't in the file, it came out in the hearing, but it's certainly, I believe, better form and accomplishes your purposes more effectively if you ask the witness about that while you have him or her in front of you. So I'm just saying that again, that's a matter of technique and effectiveness, and keeping your goal in mind, which is, was this investigation complete? If it wasn't, then why not? If it wasn't complete because the witness didn't give the police all of the information that he's giving you, then that's something that you take into account in your deliberations and your disposition.
Okay, I think we're going to move along. There are some issues there. I think when it goes to a new area, the police department has, not had a chance to say anything about that.
Exactly.
And would say things like, well, if he said it, we would have written it down in the complaint. We set all that to the side. There is a procedural issue. Let's just take a step out here. Apart from that we might have gone back to the department for a new complaint or whatever. It sort of feels to me that, like, at this point, the police department ought to have an opportunity to respond to what Mr. Fitt, the complainant, said as to the proper, for instance, photo lineup kind of things. I don't just note that. It's listening to it. I get a sense of maybe a response from the police department on the points that the complainant makes going forward in the process. Something you all may want to think about. But let's set that. So we'll go back online. And at this point, having completed the presentations and the questions from the board and the parties, of which there are none, we will move to the deliberations and discussions. And I think I will ask Hansel Aguilar to remind us of the board's rubric and of the 5 issues. We mentioned them earlier, but if Hansel, if you would do that first, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. So for the purposes of a review hearing, the board is tasked with finding whether the investigation of IA was thorough, whether it was complete, whether it was objective, whether it was impartial, and whether it was accurate. And those are the things that you should be focusing on as you discuss this particular case. I provided you with a tool that you can utilize, but you can feel free to discuss anything that you feel falls under those different standards of review. And you have the ability to make sure that you're discussing and sharing what your each point of view as a reviewer had when you looked at this case file.
So I will now ask each of you to briefly state your opinions on an evaluation of all or some of the criteria. And you may defer responding or simply state your agreement with the previous speakers. And I don't know exactly, I don't have a list of all the board members per se. So why don't I start with Mr. Mendez, then if you'll do me a favor and then just mention a subsequent board member, and we'll just go that way until we're done.
Certainly. I'm not sure I can lead a discussion of all of the things. I think if you've heard my questions, my major concerns, I guess they fall under a combination of completeness and thoroughness, in the sense that the frequent encounters of the plaintiff with the police were referenced, and we have been told that none of these 5 or 6 fit the description of the allegations made by the complainant. On the other hand, it is not documented in the file that the police who were parties to these 5 complaints actually were interviewed, and or that the body-worn camera. So If they weren't, that would be a big problem. If they were, and it's not in the file, then it probably should be. The other thing that I guess I would call on in terms of completeness is that an individual who has this many encounters with police, it seemed to be logical to talk to their family, get some information about when these other encounters had occurred and whether they had witnessed anything, whether they had witnessed any discourtesy in the interactions with police.
Can we hold there and get everyone's things, and then we'll come back and have another discussion, as I understand how it's working. And I think I can get through most of it. Mr. Frazier.
Thank you, Mr. Steele. I guess first off, I agree with Mrs. Gilmore's concern about the absence of a photo lineup, given that there was some ambiguity about Mr. Fitch's ability to identify the officer, and there was some also ambiguity about when and where it took place. So that concerned me in terms of the completeness of the file, of the completeness that was provided by the CPD. Otherwise, I thought that in reviewing the file, that the investigation was fairly thorough and that it appeared impartial. The body-worn camera footage from the interview with Sergeant Wade appeared to me to be handled with sensitivity and an awareness that the complainant had some challenges in the past and some encounters in the past, and that he was known to the department, and that the appropriate officers with regard to specialized training had been deployed to interview him. So I'll leave it with that.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Carpenter. Ms. Carpenter.
She's muted.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry about that. I appreciate what Mr. Frazier and Ms. Gilmore said on their reflections. I'm looking at the norm of accuracy and looking at what this, societal standards and applicable norms are, and curious if there were any other types of complaints within a similar timeline, perhaps within a year of that complaint that we're looking at tonight, and whether those complaints, were sustained or unfounded, and trying to draw, some accuracy on how our local, law enforcement officers react to folks who are from different parts of our community overall. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown.
Sure. So in my review of particularly the body worn camera footage, it does appear that there is an established relationship, a good rapport, some trust that has been established there, which allowed Mr. Fitch to trust the investigator, even to the point of having drawn, pictures for members of the PD. So it seems like there was some familiarity that was there, and again, on that basis, we still don't have an officer that has been identified. And sure, absolutely a picture lineup or what have you could be beneficial toward that end. But even, no officers has been identified. And I think that, that is the subject that you have to start with before you're branching out to the other spaces. And if we don't have an officer, I don't know. So
that's a good for discussion, getting the discussion. Mr. Watson.
So to add on to what everybody has said, the no officer is a bit problematic. There wasn't any recordings that I remember of where this occurred. I'm assuming it was at his house based on the other phone call, or in front of his house probably, but you don't really know the date, right? Like I would think even if something's the very minimal, right? You want to try to get a date. Even if the guy doesn't remember the complaint, he would say, get it, try to nail it down to a time frame, right? So you don't have a date. You kind of have a general time of day. You don't know the location. I think this was kind of a mental health crisis. I think this is a person who has probably some special needs. And of course, that's a big thing right now is how do we respond and support these situations, right? And that's one of the big challenges. But I think it's a special needs person that maybe having a mental health crisis. And I think a key point in that scenario would be to follow up with the family. I think he's an adult who lives with his mom, from what we've learned, and I think it covers everybody's back to just follow through. Also to again show the photos of multiple officers that fit that description or would be working during those times. Although we don't actually have a date, right, or a very specific time. So I think it's about an 85% complete file, but there's some holes, and again, I think the person may be having a crisis, may have some mental health challenges, but that's when you have to defer maybe to, again, I'm not an expert in that field, but to family members and some of the doctors. He was in the hospital, and so there might be another step that needs to be taken to just make sure everybody's clear, because he might, they interviewed him in the hospital, and then maybe a week later it would be, and they did say, once you know who it was, right, once you can identify the officer, yes, we will, please come talk to us. But maybe that final step, so that doesn't, when you don't have body worn camera footage, you don't have a date, you don't have a location, you don't have an officer. Now you got a lot of those things missing. So I think to really fully close it out would probably take just an initial step, just to confirm everybody's on the same page. Well, I guess in this case, he took the initial step because we're having this hearing, but in the real case, it was closed out. So.
All right, Mr. Watson, let's hold with that, because we're going to go after Ms. Gilmore. We're going to then get back into a more open discussion. And let's all remember that I don't think we've used in when you're doing this real. It's hard to watch names, officer names, and complainant names. Although in a public hearing, the complainant's going to be introduced, so it's going to be pretty much a name that could be used. In any event, and we'll try and stay on scope of the issues we have. Ms. Gilmore for the last board member.
Okay, to piggyback off of what Mr. Watson just said, this happened at the hospital. That's an easy fix. Whatever year it happened in, medical records, that'll show when he was there. So I don't think it's as hard as they're making it out to be. So I think maybe they need to reach out to UVA or Martha Jefferson or whichever hospital he was in, and subpoena the medical record and find out on what day he was in the hospital, what day he was admitted, and which officers was working that evening. But I think a little bit more needs to be done.
Okay. I don't mean to cut you off. Are you finished? Let me.
Yeah, a little bit more needs to be done.
Okay. That's everyone's initial reaction.
Mr. Steele, real quickly, it was my understanding that the interview took place at the hospital from the body cameras, but the incident had previously occurred in a different setting. Ms. Gilmore, did you have a different sense of the interview at the hospital?
Well, it started at the hospital. Am I wrong?
don't think we know is one of my questions. We
Yeah, I don't
know
think
where.
we know. I think Sergeant Wade interviewed him at UVA, but not, that was after the complaint had been filed.
Whenever
Never
Sergeant
tell them all. We
requests.
don't know.
Okay.
Mr.
So what about
Mendez,
his mother? Like,
let me hold us where we are for a second.
let me say this very quickly.
Yeah,
What
go ahead.
about his mother? Because if you are seen at any of these hospitals, they're going to send you a hospital bill.
Right.
So start there with the family.
Okay. At this point, I'm going to step out a second for procedural things. It seems like maybe at this point, there are some questions that people have. There was one of the police department. There may have been one of the complainants. Maybe you all need to decide if questioning is fully done once the discussions begin. I'm not advocating one way or the other, but just if you want to just note that. So the next step, as I understand where we're going, is there are no questions here. So we are just with what we have. We are going to move into the consideration of the options that the board has. I guess there's an opportunity for a minor amount of additional discussion here, but I think you all pretty well had that. You haven't had intra board discussion. I guess if that's indicated in the schedule and the protocol, we could have that. I'll go out of the moot to ask if you want to do that now, or do you want to just go straight to the consideration of options?
Yeah, quite, and I'm speaking for myself. I think that if there are some questions for the police, for the CPD, there's no reason why we can't inform ourselves and take advantage of the fact that they're here to answer those questions.
And I think at this point, I don't disagree, you all do that, but if you do that, I think those questions should go to the examiner. And then he should ask those to the police, just so there's a consistency and make it the same question twice and things like that. So you all can decide that. But I think that would be better to go through the examiner to get that to the police in a coordinated manner at this point. And I think the same thing with the complainant. After you all have had this initial rounds of discussions, if there's a question for the complainant, I think it's better if the examiner asks the questions rather than the individual board members. Just my thought.
Well,
I don't know we need to do that tonight. We're an hour and 15 minutes into it. Then I would propose that we just go straight to the discussion of the options under the code section. Is that acceptable? All right, hearing no objection, we'll go. The board is now to consider your options with regard to the findings as defined under the code. They are: 1, the board concurs with the findings of the Charlotte Police Department investigation, or the board advises the city manager that the Charlottesville Police Department's investigation findings are not supported by the information reasonably available to the department, and make further recommendations to the city manager concerning disposition of the review request, or the board advises the city manager that the Charlotte Police Department's investigation is incomplete or unsatisfactory, and provide the specific reasons for this finding. I am now to elicit opinions from each board member about which finding they favor and the reasons for their preference for that finding. And then after each member has spoken, I am to open the floor to all board members for additional discussion. So in this round of everyone's preference for a finding, let's hold that short so we can then open and have a period of discussion. So why don't I just repeat, and ideally which preference, and a few sentences of why you think that's appropriate. I'm just trying to get us through. Mr. Mendez.
Yeah,
please.
I'm torn. I believe that there is a hole in at least the documentation of whether the various police officers who had contact with him were contacted and all their body worn cameras viewed. So that's at least not in the file, and that I think is a problem.
Okay.
Also, the failure, I'll do it real quick. Also, also the failure to talk to the family is I think something that's a very difficult issue for me.
All right, Mr. Frazier.
Let me express my vote first.
Sorry, I thought you heard. My fault.
No, so but on the other hand, I think that it seems to have been you know, if we accept the evidence in the record, it seems that the subject officer who was identified was not involved. And so on that count, I think I would vote for option one. On the other hand, I think that trying to determine who was responsible, if anyone, places me in option three, incomplete, or not done.
All right, you're going to have one choice later on. Think about it, Mr. Frazier.
Yeah, I essentially agree with Mr. Chairman Mendez. I think that there was some incompleteness in the CPD investigation. However, that said, I think the lack of specificity from the complainant regarding both the identification of the officer or the inability to identify the officer and the inability to sort of pin down a date, raises questions about the validity of the evidence in the complaint. So I would vote to concur.
Okay, Mr. Brown.
I mean, on the basis of the rapport that was established or that's previously held with the investigating officer, there seems again some familiarity, relationship that's there, and the inability to identify. I still don't have an officer, so I would concur.
Okay, Mr. Watson.
I'm gonna go with incomplete, primarily because I think this process will make them do their job better or differently, but I think incomplete primarily because, as Ms. Gilmore said, they could have talked with his mother, they could have talked to the hospital, just to fully close out or at least get as much information as possible, particularly when you can't write down a date and a location. I can say this happened to me, but I would think that they would at least write down a date and location. And then of course there's no body cam. But yeah, so there's a couple more steps at least that need to be taken on this one. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gilmore.
I vote incomplete because I feel that enough wasn't done, even when the plaintiff was, the first plaintiff was interviewed, and I think it was at the police department. To me, what I saw was the officer talking him out of the description that he was given. And I think they should have showed him photos. You know that the gentleman is dealing with mental illness. You should have talked to family members. There's only 2 hospitals in Charlottesville, UVA and Martha Jefferson. There's a paper trail. You go to either one of those hospitals or send some to the hospital, the year that he was in there, you can pretty much sum it up, or go to his mother, and that'll give you the date, the year, the date, and it'll give you everything that you need. And you go by that and you can go back and figure out who the officers were or who this certain officer is. And with Mr. Fitch, I know from filing complaints, when you go in there, oftentimes you are nervous and you do leave certain details out of the report that you are writing to give to them. So I understand that he left something out, but I vote incomplete. I think y'all need to do a better job. And when people come in, they don't know who the officers are. If they give you a description, then do a photo lineup. Show them pictures. They know who the officer is. So I vote incomplete.
Okay, thank you. I think I covered all of the board
No,
members.
not Ms. Carpenter.
Oh, Miss Carpenter. I knew I was short somebody, but I didn't know who it was.
I know, when you look at about a dozen set of eyes looking back at you, people can disappear.
Well, and the screen moves people around some and.
It does, it does.
Anyway, I'm sorry.
Okay, very quickly,
Let me call Ms. Carpenter now. Go ahead.
Very
Yes, ma'am.
quickly, in the interest of time, I would have to concur with Ms. Gilmore that my conclusion would be that it is incomplete and unsatisfactory for the reasons that she mentioned. And that would be where I would be at on the spectrum. Thank you.
All right, thank you, and I do apologize. We have a sense of an initial reaction from all of you of 3 concurs and 3 incompletes for somewhat similar reasons, but each person has their own reasons. Same thing on concurring. There are different reasons to concur. At this point, I think I think what I would do, I don't think we do it tonight, but you would go into a discussion as you all would attempt to persuade each other one way or the other. I don't think I'm happy to do that, but I'm not sure that you all want to do that. Mr. Mendez?
I'm sorry, I apologize for confusing the matter when I started, but I should not be down as concurring. If I were to write, again, which would be our next step, which would you go on to write a report, I would say we agree that there is, not sufficient evidence to support a charge against Officer blank. However, we also believe, our real finding is that, that the investigation is incomplete. So just to set the record straight, tilt the balance over a little bit toward incomplete.
Mr. Frazier, I recall that your vote was in part by what Mr. Mendez had said. Does your vote remain the same, or have you?
Well, I agree exactly what Mr. Mendez said, which was that I don't think there's sufficient evidence to find the officer in violation because we don't really know who he was. That being said, I could go either way because I feel like the investigation was incomplete. It could have been more thorough, and I would probably recommend that we send it back to CBD for further investigation along the lines that Ms. Gilmore expressed and Ms. Carpenter expressed.
Can I say something by chance? I think it needs to be understood the climate that we're in, especially with the new administration in the Commonwealth of Virginia. I think that if we look at the complaint, there is a specific officer. The officer was identified as not being that person. I think that we need to take this approach of what's happening in the Commonwealth as a whole, and really getting to adjudicating the facts or looking at the facts, because a whole lot of people are looking at us and they're looking at us to fail. We've come through a heck of a year last year with this body of work, and I think that we have to be in a position with people again looking at us to fail to really step up to the plate and adjudicate the facts. That's just my impression where I am, and I know that a lot of people are looking for us to fail.
And can I ask for and piggybacking on Mr. Brown, a question? I mean, are we only here to decide whether this officer violated this code section up or down, or are we here also, and maybe Ms. Hudson can answer this, to weigh in on whether we think that decision was based on incomplete or complete evidence in the file? Because I'm a bit confused about that. It seems to me, to Mr. Brown's point, is the ultimate question up or down the officer is in violation, or do we also opine about the completeness of the investigation that had been undertaken?
If you'll recall, in the opening comments from your hearing examiner, it set forth, and Hansel repeated them at the end of the evidence that you heard at the end of questioning, but that the focus here, given, and let me just back up a little bit to the ordinance. The ordinance authorizes the board to conduct hearings in a number of circumstances, 3 of which involve your exercising your own investigative authority, which is to actually get to the merits of the underlying allegation, the underlying complaint of misconduct against an officer or other employee of the police department. And that then would drive questions that in your final disposition would be you all making a determination as to whether or not that officer or employee engaged in the conduct that is alleged to have been violative of policy or the law, or whatever the nature of the allegation was. And your dispositions in those circumstances are the same ones that are available to the police department when they investigate internally: sustained, not sustained, unfounded, founded. That's not the authority that you're exercising tonight. Tonight, you are exercising your authority to review the nature of the police department's investigation on those 5 points that Hansel and the hearing examiner mentioned: completeness, thoroughness, impartiality, objectivity, and accuracy. And while there's some redundancy in those descriptions, your focus, in my understanding, is on whether or not the police department followed its policies with respect to the investigation, whether it applied the procedures, the investigative procedures that you all would have believed were required to ultimately decide whether or not their investigation was complete or not complete, whether you concur in the sense that you believe they reached a disposition following a methodology that was acceptable. And that's the concurrence in this, as opposed to, and again, that's my understanding of what your goal is tonight, as opposed to reaching the merits of the question of whether or not the officer in question violated policy. And I know it's perhaps hard to separate those decisions, and perhaps we can reword your choices of findings when you are in this mode of reviewing the nature of the police department investigation, because that is the mode that you are in tonight, and not being right now the judge of whether or not the police officer violated policy. Because if you recall, in the ordinance, as a result of a request review of this nature, if you determine that the police investigation was incomplete, you have the option then of investigating it yourself. And then in that subsequent proceeding, there's a do-over where you all are asking the questions and pursuing the lines of questioning and investigation that you found that the police didn't do, that you thought they should have done. So I hope that's helpful, perhaps, in drawing a distinction between your job tonight versus your job in a true investigative related hearing.
Yes, thank you very much.
Mr. Mendez, did you have a comment? Your hand's up.
Yeah, I again apologize for being confusing in my initial answer to the question. My own feeling is very strongly that if we don't have a complete investigation, we don't have a basis for making a decision. I'm working with a certain city councilor who now happens to be mayor. His major concern for us was that we made decisions without adequate information. And so we both worked very hard to make sure that didn't happen. And so one of the tools that we have to make sure that happens is the finding of incomplete. And so that's where my sentiments lie right now.
And with that understanding, I think I would change my vote to incomplete.
All right, so here's where we are. I don't know that we need a additional discussion. We've sort of reached where we are on this. The next thing I would do, I understand, would be to take the vote, but I don't think we can do that. But I think that will just, in a amount of time, just happen. Probably the same vote as everyone's expressed. But we would go through that nominally. There's another discussion to have this back and forth to see if anyone wants to change their votes. And so we actually had that, and things were clarified. So I think that's good. The next thing that would happen, won't happen tonight necessarily, is that you would discuss any policy recommendations or whatever. And I'm guessing that you could have some of those based on what we learned, but I don't know that since this is a mock hearing, we need to do that. If you want to, we could discuss that. Hansel or Mr. Mendez, where do we go from here? What would you like to do? I'm happy to do more.
Well, I think that in our little procedure sheet, this was yet another discussion section with comments from the board as to how it went. I would certainly also like to include the representatives of the police department, and feel free for them to make any comments that they want to make, before we close.
Let me do one thing to start. I'm going to thank you all the citizens. I mean, I'm fairly much invested in this with my time on the panel that Hansel and I were on the panel in Fairfax County. We had our first mock was just about as like this. We learned things that we had a procedure sort of short. Some of those question periods that you might want to consider. I think those might be useful or at least decided. But I would like to thank you all for being in this process, and I'd like to thank the police department. We actually, the thing that makes Fairfax County work is the cooperation and investment by the police department in the process. And we got that early on, and it works well. It has you establish a good relationship. I seem to feel that there is such a relationship, and I thank the three of you who attended tonight and expressed at a larger level of civilian review in the state of Virginia appreciation to the chief for committing to be an active and interested party in this process. So I just want to say that before
Well, thank you. Thank you, Adrian. I think you've done a superb job as well. I appreciate it. And again, as I said at the beginning, and you said, this would not have been possible without the cooperation of the police. Of the police department. I would like to invite representatives of the department to make any final statements they might have at this point.
No.
Okay.
Let me say one thing about that. Over time, the Fairfax Police Department has sort of learned what the citizens panel will reasonably expect. I mean, you sort of understand where that is. And then they have, when we start these in 2017, we started them seriously, maybe late 2017. They have adjusted and improved, enhanced is the way they describe it. Their investigation, for instance, there's a fairly fulsome letter to the complainant explaining why the decision was made, and the police department themselves made that decision, because if they explained more, they may not get people asking for a review of the complaints. You know what I mean? Because oftentimes they were getting just an unfounded thank you letter. And so there's a lot to be gained on both sides here. And that's all I have. Thank you.
I'd like to also thank Mr. I would just like to thank Mr. Fitch for doing a superb job and helping us tonight and participating as our complainant. Appreciate your willingness to step up.
Any other comments from the board?
Bill, real quick, this Hansel.
Yes.
Are you going to still have public comments, or are you done with
Yes,
that? Okay.
we seem to have time.
Yeah, and just real quick, I just want to reiterate some of the statements have been made. This isn't possible if we don't have the cooperation from the police department. And for the purpose of this exercise, they have been very transparent with us. They facilitated us the case file and the body worn camera. And I think we're in a good start if we're going to build on this foundation. I definitely want to just make that public statement to my colleagues. And I'm looking forward. I know there are going to be areas where we may disagree in the future, but I think we got a good opportunity here to show the citizens that we have uh, both parties able to work together to make this happen. And we're going to get better. There's clearly a lot of areas that's still available for training. And that was the purpose of this exercise, to identify areas where we can improve as a board, where we can improve the processes. So I think we're in a good place. It might have looked a little bit all over the place depending on your vantage point, but I think that we got through the exercise being able to go through the steps was very important. And I want to highlight our colleague Roy Fitch. He's the supervisor of the Home to Hope program, and he graciously agreed to be a role player, and he's a great colleague of ours, and we appreciate his time.
All right, so I guess it is time for public
Mr. Watson
comment.
has a question.
Oh, sorry.
His hands up.
James, yes.
Real quick, I also want to thank Mr. Fitch for joining us and giving us his time. One of the other things I was thinking about, Charlottesville's a small town. I've been there for a long time, and as I went through this, I'll say I have some familiarity with the person. I won't say any names, anything like that, but I think there's advantages to having people that have been in this community for a long time and know a variety of people. So I had a little familiarity actually when I was looking at everything. Then at the same time, I'm wondering, and maybe this is from Ms. Hudson, at what point, like we need people that are familiar with the community, right? That are part of the community. But then at the same time, I want to be a part of, these types of hearings. But then if I know somebody, is that problematic, right? Like I'm approaching everything from an unbiased lens. But it's such a small town that we're going to have people that file these hearing procedures, and we're going to be like, I know that guy. He lived 2 houses down from here. We went to, like in Bellamy's case, we went to middle school together,
Sure.
And how do we handle those situations?
Well, you'll recall, Mr. Watson, that the board has considered, and I believe adopted, a code of ethics that speaks to the situations that you described in terms of having some familiarity with the participants, with the parties to a hearing as a conflict of interest, which would be a basis for you to recuse yourself from consideration of that particular complaint and participation in the hearing process. So that's a matter of, obviously, the personal integrity that you all have to acknowledge when that circumstance exists and to put it on the table and state that you'll be recusing yourself for that reason. So you've already reckoned with that possibility by adopting that code of ethics. I believe it was indeed formally adopted. Was it, Chair Mendez?
No, I think it's going to be part of our new standard operating procedures. What I was going to suggest, and where, it's part of our guest speakers series, our special topic series, the first one is about FOIA. The second one could be about conflict of interest.
We could perhaps do that in a single meeting
okay.
Unless you want
I'll get with you.
Split them up.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Any more comments? Mr. Trail, are there any members of the public who wish to speak?
Yes, if you'd like to speak at this time, please click the raise hand icon in your Zoom webinar. If you're joining us via telephone, you can press *9. Each speaker will be given 3 minutes. And Mr. Chair, there are no raised hands.
Okay. Is there a motion to adjourn the special session?
Thank you, Mr. Mendez, and I so move.
Second?
Yes. Ms. Robinson, could you poll the board, please?
Yes, I can. Okay, Member Carpenter,
Yes.
Member Brown,
Yes.
Member Gilmore, Moore,
Yes.
Member Frazier,
Yes.
Member Watson.
Yes. Yes. I don't know if you can hear me or not. Okay.
Yes.
Did you get me? Sorry.
I believe so. I called you, but.
Okay, I guess I did. I'm getting old.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. The meeting is adjourned.
Thanks,
Appreciate
all.
Thank
all
you.
of the role players, and it's very good. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Good
Appreciate
night.
that. Appreciate the opportunity. Bye.
Thanks, Mr. Steele.